We are absolutely huge fans of Resident Evil 7. However, it's not perfect. Even the most hardcore fans of it have some complaints. We scoured the internet from Twitter to forums to see what people are bothered by the most. Consider this video more constructive criticism. We're talking about 7 things that Resident Evil 7 players hate. Also, be warned that there are some spoilers in this video. You should finish the game and then come back to this video. But let's get started off with number 7. One of the biggest things that have bothered some players, especially longtime fans of the series, is the molded. Not necessarily just who they are or how you fight them or their difficulty, but just they kind of lose their luster very quickly. They start off as very terrifying enemies, and then they just very quickly become the fodder. And frankly, there's not enough variety to them. It really would have been nice to see some other enemy types besides just the few molded that you deal with. You know, the fat molded, the regular molded, the bigger molded, the crawling molded. That's about all you really encounter in the game, and it leaves a little bit to be desired if you ask me and if you ask a lot of other players. I hate to sound like the old man that'll compare it to the old Resident Evil games, but in the old Resident Evil games, you had hunters, you had lickers, you had zombies, you had the nemesis, you had all these other factors going on and juggling. And we know Resident Evil 7 is a completely different thing, but we still would have liked to have seen a bit more. And at number 6, let's acknowledge the lack of something that definitely grinds people's gears, and that is the lack of a Mercenaries mode. Mercenaries mode for a lot of Resident Evil fans is the main reason to stick around and get some replay value out of the game. Mercenaries mode started out as kind of a cheap throwaway mode, but quickly became a beloved mode played by many, many people. And sure, yeah, the previous Resident Evil games and mercenary modes worked the best with the over-the-shoulder third-person game, but you know, Resident Evil 7's combat wasn't bad, and honestly, it probably would have fared pretty well in a Mercenaries mode. Thankfully, Resident Evil 7 and its DLCs do give us some other types of game modes, but nothing as good as that traditional Mercenaries mode that we used to really sink our teeth into, you know? Just imagine some crazy, ridiculous mercenary mode where you could actually play as some of the bakers. They have their own attacks, their own animations, so why not? I would have loved to have seen something like that. Or maybe even a Mercenaries mode where you're tackling multiple varieties of the Baker family at once. If it sounds crazy and ridiculous, well, that's what Mercenaries mode really is. And at number 5, one of the things we saw most that popped up on forums was that the puzzles don't really test your might at all. You could probably count on one finger the amount of puzzles that really actually tested your brain a bit, and you had to actually use some critical thinking. Those light puzzles are easily found, the keys to find for certain doors are easily telegraphed. The only one that really required any type of critical thinking outside the box was the one with opening the furnace door. I think with how big the grounds of the Baker compound and the Baker house really was, I think there was potential for a lot more weird, quirky, and out there puzzles that unfortunately we didn't really seem to get. But I will say though, when there are puzzles, especially the happy birthday moment in the game, that's where the game is probably the best, and we just would have loved more of that. And at number 4, something that bothered us a bit is the main Baker house. In the Resident Evil marketing and all the previews and everybody talking about this game, they talked about the Baker house being a return to form and being comparable to the original Spencer mansion in the Arklay Mountains from the original Resident Evil. And it doesn't seem to be totally the case. While it comes close, it just seems to have been a little bit short-lived. Very early on in the game, you get out of the Baker house and you move on to other areas within the game. That main Baker house at first seemed like a very, very cool labyrinth filled with a bunch of locked doors, but surprisingly quickly in the game, you finish all that, and then that area basically becomes mostly a safe space while you move on to other areas. I would have liked to have really felt the feeling of being locked in an entire house, you know? And at number 3, something that we definitely hate that isn't really necessarily a bad thing are some unanswered questions. Now, I will be the first to say that I love mystery and I really love not having all my questions answered for me immediately, but we do have a lot of questions and it does drive us nuts. Like, what exactly really happened to Lucas? Lucas really kind of seemed like a missed opportunity, especially given his final fate, and how he gets away is really explained, and he kind of just seems like he's wrote off and instantly kind of just disappears from the story after his last encounter. That's all you get from Lucas. I would have liked a little bit more conclusion with him, seeing as you spend a lot of time dealing with him and learning about him and talking to him in the game. There's a bunch of other questions we would love to see asked, and it's really driving us crazy, like Mia and who exactly she really works for and what she was doing. But I think that's just really Capcom and Resident Evil setting up the new Resident Evil games. I'm sure Resident Evil 8 will tell us much more. And at number 2, speaking of setting up more Resident Evil games, this is probably one of our most petty complaints, but it's one we've seen a lot, and that is Chris Redfield's face. Oh my god, what the fuck happened? That's not my Chris Redfield. I don't know what happened. Like, I know it's like a soft reboot of a game, but it's in the continuity, and I understand the game developers' designs and techniques and art styles change, but that doesn't look like Chris Redfield at all. Actually, that dude's face kind of looks kind of busted. For me personally, that forced reveal in the end would have had such a bigger impact if it actually looked like regular old Chris Redfield. I know it's a dumb complaint, and it's totally totally minor, but it's something we wanted to acknowledge because we've heard from a lot of other people that have been driven crazy by this. And at number 1, probably the biggest thing we hate in Resident Evil 7, and honestly it's probably a compliment, is the lack of videotapes. The videotapes seem like one of the more exciting variables to Resident Evil 7 and its gameplay, and in the main game, we really only get 4. Sure, we've gotten some additions here and there with DLC, but it's still just not enough, and we really thought that the whole videotape thing could have had way more potential than it actually turned out to be. They really just seemed like little tiny expansions on the story, you know, mainly around the sewer gators and Clancy, and we would have liked to have seen much more experimental stuff in terms of those scenarios and gameplay types. They're probably going to keep giving us more through DLC and just added content and downloads, and I definitely hope that's the case, but I think that main regular vanilla game really lacked any true input with the videotape thing that, you know, compared to what we really thought it was gonna be. But overall, those are some things that we found on the internet that really bothered Resident Evil 7 fans. We know you might have a few more gripes down in the comments, so definitely let us know. Let us know anything you want about Resident Evil 7, from things that you liked, things that you hated, and things you'd like to see changed in probably another Resident Evil game coming soon. If you had a good time stopping over here, clicking the like button helps us out a ton, and subscribing if you're new is a good idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.